Rob Thomson, thank you very much for joining me today and welcome to the channel.
No worries. Thank you very much, Matt. So I'm Rob Thomson, and up until February of this year, I was the Australian Library and Information Association New South Wales State Manager. So I'm based in New South Wales, Australia. So I was the New South Wales State Manager for the Australian Library and Information Association. And before that, I taught for 10 years at TAFE, which is kind of like a polytechnic in the UK. So technical and further education. And I was teaching library technicians, which is also something that the UK doesn't have, but a library technician is more of a hands-on kind of role rather than a managerial role that a librarian would have. So I taught that for 10 years, and before that, from 1992 to 2009, I was a library technician working in a company library rather than a public library. So I had a short stint of about 9 months working on a Thursday night and a Saturday morning for the local library. And I did that while I was also working as a library technician at the library at the Steelworks where I was working. So I don't have very much a public library background, but it's libraries. And then when I was teaching, you had to teach for public libraries, special libraries, school libraries, university libraries, all that kind of thing. So my overview of the industry was quite broad, and so that's basically my history up until now. But since the end of March, I worked as a brand ambassador for a company in Australia called Rayco, which distributes library materials and library furnishings and shelving and all that kind of stuff. Still trying to figure that bit out. Yeah, I guess that brings you up to date with what I've been doing.
Okay, and for those that don't know about the responsibilities or day-to-day duties, can you shed more light on what a library technician does or a manager? Maybe can you shed a little bit more information to give us an idea of the job itself and what it entails and what's exciting about it or challenging in general?
Yep. So the library technician role is, as I said, very hands-on. So I was responsible for doing all the journals as they came in and then distributing around the plant, around the offices. So journals, I also looked after all the standards, so like British standards, so Australian standards, but also looked after international standards, so British standards, ISO standards, DIN, all those sorts of things. I was responsible for getting hold of international standards. Australian standards were accessed online, but had to be administered. So I had looked after that. I also did research, so searching online. The level of complexity, once it got to a point, I would hand it across to my boss and she would do the far more in-depth stuff, but a lot of research I could do. I also looked after the buying of all the books. So anybody who requested the books, this is across the entire company. So the company I was based in Port Kembla, which is just south of Sydney. It's about an hour and a half south of Sydney. So I was based there, but the company itself was based not only in Sydney and Port Kembla, but also in Melbourne and New Zealand and across the country. And I would be the purchaser of all the books for anybody who wanted that. And then obviously we would also do the cataloguing. We'd also buy, so this was only like a holiday. If the other person was on holidays, I would also order some interlibrary loans, but also journal articles, document delivery. I would do that as well. And also put the books away back on the shelf and that kind of thing. So it's very, like I said, hands-on. In a public library, you'd be on the floor, walking around, talking to people very much, or you'd be cataloguing or doing all sorts of things. And the New South Wales State Manager role was about supporting the members of ALIA, which is Australian Library and Information Association. So supporting the members, helping them to get their professional development up to speed. Continuing professional development is very important. So helping also to coordinate that within New South Wales, but just basically supporting members and helping them to do the things that they needed to do, more or less. So that involved visiting libraries and talking to people. And so it's very much direct dialoguing with people. And during COVID, we ran, I started a thing on a Friday night of people who, because everyone was either working from home or working in a library, but no public thing. And I just thought that these people, your partner would probably not appreciate you banging on about what you did in the library all day or what you did at home all day. So it was a place that people could just come and not vent, but just talk about library stuff without having to annoy their partner. Really, that was kind of the gist of it. And we did that we started that I think in April of 2020 and ran that till. So in round about the end of July, I think we did it for those couple of months, just because everybody was locked in and locked down, and just gave people somewhere to come on a Friday night and have a chat and talk about library stuff or just talk about life without, it was somebody else to talk to basically that wasn't your partner. So that was the basic gist of it all.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's roughly what I do.
And what would you say how the landscape of libraries has changed over the years? I mean, we are now having a lot of technology around us, people accessing information on the internet, which is not necessarily a great thing. It is convenient, but back in the days, people would have to walk up to the library and research things, read them, question, and then educate themselves. Now, whatever is out there on the internet, people mostly believe without questioning it because it's being fed to them. Are people still going as often or as many people to the libraries, or has that shifted now completely and the numbers have dropped down significantly?
It's a good question. So libraries have changed enormously. I mean, when I was teaching the course, so I was teaching a course in 2018 or 2016, 17, 18 that had been written in 2014 or 2015, sorry. So it was started in 2014. They finished writing the course in 2015. We started teaching it halfway through 2016, and going into 2019, we still had the same course. But in that time, things had changed a lot. The one thing that you can say about libraries is it will change. It changes a lot. And it's just part of what libraries do, I guess. And so it was interesting with COVID because a lot of libraries in Australia reacted quite quickly. Some didn't and some did. So it's a mixed bag in that sense. But a lot of libraries reacted really quickly and put things like kids' story time up on YouTube, those sorts of things, and did lots of craft activities on YouTube. So you need to get these things together, paddle pop sticks and paper and glue and all this sort of stuff. And then we'll do it online, and then you go and do it, and ta-da, there you go. So there was a lot of that happened, and a lot of book clubs went online and those sorts of things. When COVID finished, even though it hasn't, and it became freer, getting people back into the library took a while for that to happen. But now people are a bit more relaxed about COVID and the restrictions, and people still wear masks occasionally. But, as people have come back into circulation, into libraries, a lot of people have come back to the library because I go to the library to work if I have to, because it's just a better environment to actually do stuff than if I work from here at home. So if I work from home, the fridge is there, the TV's there, everything's just a bit too close. Whereas if I work from the library, it's a bit more that environment. And there's a lot of people who go to the library to do that. A lot of people have started their own businesses now that COVID gave them the opportunity to stop and think, and do I really want to do this anymore? I think I should start my own business. So they've done that. But the library gives them an office to go to work out of. So in that regard, libraries, well, at least in Australia, the numbers are back to what they were, or above what they were before the pandemic. So back to March of 2020, they're back to those levels now. So at least in Australia, things seem to be on the up. And libraries have, they're offering lots of programs, lots of those sorts of things that are getting people back into libraries. And I've helped out in a small way of suggesting some things that might get men back into libraries and that kind of thing. But it's been more about, so that idea of getting people back into the place and back into that seems to have worked, and people are back. That still do some programming online, but way less than they used to. It may be, that they'll do an author talk that might be at, say, 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the morning, but they'll record it and make that available later because not everybody can get there at 11, that kind of thing. As for how people access information, before I started working in the library, I was working in an office at the Steelworks, and I didn't realise until a lot later that I had been doing sort of research library stuff, because I had a couple of books in front of me and people would ask me stuff and I would go and find an answer. And one time that involved writing to Boeing to find out whether or not someone had asked, can a 747 do a barrel roll? I don't know. Who knows? Nobody knows. So I wrote to Boeing and asked the question, and apparently it's never been done, but apparently, yes, it can. So when the 707 was launched way back 1959 or something, all the airline executives came to Seattle, and the hydroplane races were on the Sunday, so they took all the Boeing took all the airline executives down to the races, and the chief pilot came in and flew a 707 down the line and then rolled it through a complete barrel roll. And they all turned up Monday morning and signed a piece of paper that said, yep, we'll take them. So, and they said, well, the 747 is built on the same principles and same basic design, so it will barrel roll if you obey these certain parameters. But that was the kind of thing I did for the people that I worked with. It was only, a relatively small office of about a dozen people, but they would ask questions and I'd go find the answer. So, yes, researching on the internet, we got the internet in the library in around about the end of 94. So I've been using it since 95. And it made finding things a lot easier. But you also had to remember that sometimes it isn't on the internet. You have to find the book that has the information that will give you the answer. And so, a lot of research is all about knowing how to research. And that's one of the things that doing the library technician course helped in formulating, or knowing where to go to find the answer, or knowing how to ask the question in the first place to get the answer. Because sometimes it's not so much what's the question, but kind of what's the question behind the question, which will help you then come up with the answer. And sometimes, and sometimes the answer will be in a book. I used to tell my students that there are only ever two questions in the library. One is, do you have it? And then, can I have it? Can you give it to me, kind of thing. So everything else just falls under that same banner. Now, whether that's a music CD or a DVD or the answer to a question, it's all the same thing, or a book that you want to read. Whatever it is, it's, do you have it and can I get it? That's basically it.
Can we shift a little bit gears here? And can I ask you maybe, could you paint a picture of your childhood, teenage years?
Well, I mean, that's a big question. I mean, would I like to be a teenager now? And the answer would probably be, well, yeah, because it depends. Do I retain the knowledge that I have now? No, probably not. But so I grew up. Now I have to preface this by saying that we always used libraries. That was a part of growing up. But I grew up in a place, the Hunter Valley, which is north of Sydney. It's about, well, from here, it's about 3 hours drive. From Sydney, it's about an hour and a half. Well, yeah, another hour and a half north of Sydney. So I grew up there, fairly unremarkable, nothing really to write home about. We then moved to a place called Orange, actually, a place called Boranor, but Orange, which is out in the central west of New South Wales. And it's about 4.5 hours drive from here, roughly. So we moved out there for 2.5 years, and then my dad applied for a job he was a school teacher, and he applied for a job up in New Guinea. So we went and lived in Lae, New Guinea for 2 years, and those 2 years were quite transformative, I guess, because we'd come out of very Anglo-centric, very white upbringing in a very, sort of a rural city out at Orange, and going to somewhere like Lae, which is obviously completely ethnically diverse. Lots of New Guineans, lots of Melanesians, lots of Chinese, lots of mixed race people, Americans, Canadians, Swiss, all sorts of people operated from there. It's on the coast, so it was okay in that sense. It was also very wet and very hot, but being in New Guinea gave me, because I would have been 14, 15 at the time, so that gave me a completely different view of humanity, I guess. And I remember one time we went to a place called Jimmy River, Jimi, Jimmy River, which is up in the highlands. And it had only been contacted by white people probably 15 years before that. So it was a pretty wild place to be. And we hung out there. And I remember one night we were sitting around the campfire, and we had lit a fire here, and there was a fire not that far away. It would probably take you half an hour if you could fly that distance, but to get there would have taken an entire day to go from where we were down to the bottom of the river and then back up again to get to the other place. It would take you an entire day to walk it. And I had no desire to do that. But we lit a fire, they lit a fire, we just talked. But there was a guy there, and he and the people we were with said, well, this guy knows at least 5 languages. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I know a little bit of pidgin English and I know English, but we're supposed to be the clever ones. He knows 5 languages. So it kind of, put that whole racial stereotyping thing into that's a load of rubbish, really. So, well, what's for me? So that whole experience of being in a completely different culture and a completely different racial makeup, in a completely different understanding of the world, in a sense, just gave me. So coming back, when we came back to Wollongong and Port Kembla, not that we came back, but when we came back to Australia and ended up here, it was a bit of a massive adjustment, because that was in 1969-70, which for pop culture references, for music, for a whole heap of things, was a really seminal 2 years. And you missed out on, I completely missed out on all that. So ever since, it's been kind of a relearning of what I should have known, in a sense. So anyway, so my childhood was with my 3 siblings, mostly, especially out of Orange and then up in New Guinea. So they became it was a gang of four, really. And that, for whatever reason, shapes you in one way. But once we got back into civilization and adjusted, growing up, I thought was pretty ordinary. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but it may have been, if I look back and consider it. But at the time, it seemed pretty ordinary growing up, getting a car license, getting a car, driving around, all that kind of stuff. So is it better now than then? Well, you're probably more connected. Although we used to organise parties somehow or other and go to people's places and just have and everybody knew to turn up and everybody knew whose place it was. So in that sense, it's no different to someone sending it out on WhatsApp and saying, we're going around to Les's place, and we'd all go around. But we all ended up at Les's place or Mick's place or her place or whatever, and we all just had fun and danced around and behaved like idiots. But it was no it was no in that sense it was no different to today. Like people, my grandkids are, well, the oldest one's only 12, but she's sort of organising to go around to her friend's place and off she goes, that kind of thing. So we were doing that too, but I don't think it's that different. I know everyone will say, oh, yeah, but they're exposed to more things these days. Well, yeah, but you could always find stuff if that's what you wanted to find, I guess. So I'm not sure that it's any better or any worse in a sense. We are all a product of the times we grow up in, and there's not much you can do to change that. It just is what it is, and that's how it goes, I guess.
I recently had a conversation with someone when there used to be a gathering, you used to meet up with your friends. There were less no-shows than there are today. When people said they would come, they would, and they would stand to their words. People used to be honorable, and they used to, if they said something, they would do it. And now it's less visible.
Yeah, I think that's true. There was, yeah, if someone said that they would be there, they would definitely be there. And if they didn't turn up, then you worried because they would normally turn up. So if they didn't turn up, they would, well, either they'd ring somebody and tell them why they couldn't turn up. But yeah, pretty much if someone said they were going to turn up, they'd turn up. That's true.
Okay. Are there any regrets or anything that you want to change in your past or throughout your life in general? Or were you quite satisfied with the journey, the progress, and how, everything turned out to be?
Yeah, well, I started work in 1992 in the library, and at the end of the first week went, what the hell have I been doing with my life? This just makes so much sense for me. I've got a head full of trivia and a head full of stuff which is of absolutely no use apart from in a library when people come in and ask you all sorts of weird, wonderful questions. And sometimes it's a case of, well, I know the answer to this. Here's the answer. And they go, well, how do you know that? I don't know how I know. I just know that I know. And this is the answer. And then they'll go and some of them will then go and look it up and go, oh, he is right. Or, no, you're not, you're wrong. But no, it's so for me, it was a case of it took till 1992 before I realised that this is where I'm supposed to be in libraries. So, in some regards, I wish that had happened in 82 rather than 92. 10 years earlier, I could have gone and done more but it didn't. And what I had done prior to 92 also contributed in some way to figuring out that supported what I did in the library field because I had that prior knowledge, that prior life. I visited the UK in 1977 and 78. So that was another learning experience and another way of figuring out people, I guess, and places and my place in the world and all that kind of stuff. And so coming back in 78, I got a job at the Steelworks. I thought I'd do it for a couple of years. The first job I had lasted about 6 months, and then I got moved to a different department and different. Someone asked me the other day, do you plan what you're doing? And I went, no, it's all just kind of happened. So, especially since 2009, there was a restructure. My job went, and I was offered a desktop publishing, but that didn't appeal. So I went and basically tried to get another job. In the process of that, someone suggested I contact the TAFE. I contacted the TAFE. They put me on as a teacher. I did the course that I had to do to be able to teach. And then we come to the end of that, and I was offered the job of the ALIA New South Wales State Manager. I didn't go looking for it. I got it. I also work one day a fortnight at the moment for a company called Studio 301, which is Australia's largest format music recording studio. I had met the guy who manages that place at a conference in 2016 in Adelaide, and I met him purely because I looked for somewhere to sit, sat down next to him. He says, "What do you do?" I said, "Where are you from?" That kind of thing. Next thing I know, I go and see him, talk to him, and I invite him to come. And so I run an unconference. Well, I have run unconferences. I've done about a dozen of unconferences, which quickly is a conference. At a conference, you normally go, you get into a conversation, then someone rings a bell, and you go and listen to somebody up the front give a presentation, which can be good or can be, well, that was all right. And someone suggested back in 2005 that what if we got rid of the presentations and the speakers and just had people sitting around in small groups talking about the stuff that they wanted to talk about, like you do at morning tea or lunchtime. So I ran one of those, and that proved to be more successful than I thought it would be, I suppose. And in the end, I ran about 12 of those. So I invited him to come to one of those. He invites me to come and look at the studio before they knocked it down and built the new one. And I've been hanging around. So I went and saw the studio. Then I ended up writing a piece for the library magazine about why music studios and libraries are kind of the same thing, because we're all about creativity and connection and and collaboration and all that kind of stuff. And so I've been hanging with Studio 301 for a while, and then they needed help to be able to talk to libraries about audio digitization, because I speak a library language and they speak a music language, well, engineering language. They just couldn't quite match it up. So I've been helping them out in that regard. But that came about without me looking for a job. It just came about. And similarly with RACO, which is the library furnishings and shelving and materials people, they contacted me and said, "Look, we've got this brand ambassador thing going. Do you want to be a part of it?" And I just said yes. So in a lot of regards, I haven't planned anything. It's just, and even the job at the library in 92, I'd only discovered the library the year before, that we actually had a library. And then my department was going to lose someone, and someone would have to be transferred to a different department. And it could have been me, but a job came up. I read the thing, thought, well, I could do that, and applied for it, said all the right things. Well, I like to think I said all the right things. Anyway, I got the job. But again, at the end of the first week, I'm going, why haven't I not done this before? Like, this just makes sense. So, yeah, in a lot of regards, I haven't planned anything, and it's just happened, and which is probably not very helpful to anybody who listens to this. But sometimes good things happen, and that's okay.
So you have to take your chances in life to find out that something might turn out to be a good thing at the end.
Yeah. Well, my philosophy that I didn't realize I had, but I got interviews on a different podcast, and at the end they said, "What would be your advice to anybody doing a library technician course?" I went, "Just turn up." Basically, that's been my whole philosophy. You just turn up. So
Mm.
because you don't know who you're going to sit next to, you don't know what that conversation will be about, and you don't know where it will go. But if you're not there, no one can talk to you. No one can offer you a job. No one can offer you or give you an idea that you can then run with. It does turn out to be that just turning up is sometimes that's okay. So you kind of have so in ALIA in library world in Australia it's a relatively small industry. It's about 7,000 people or something like that. Well, it's not, might be a bit more than that, but it's not many. And in New South Wales is well, it must be more than 7,000, but let's say 10,000 people are in libraries. So in New South Wales, that's about 5,000 people. I don't know 5,000 people, but I do know a considerable number of those people. And it is about just knowing people, and networking is really important. And the best way to network is just turn up and talk to people and answer their questions and ask them questions. And that's, well, so far it's worked for me. So,
Okay, very interesting. Thank you for sharing this. And what's a piece of advice you've received that stuck with you throughout your life, and why?
that's a bit harder to answer. I would like to say be yourself. Well, I think be yourself, but I think that has to be qualified in a way. It took me a long time to figure out that I was who I was. So it's okay to say be yourself, but you have to figure out who yourself is in order to be that. Does that make sense? Like you need to understand who you are. Because I used to compare myself to my siblings and go, well, I'm not like them, even though they're all younger than me. I would look at them and I would look at my mum and dad and I would look at people I know and go, well, I'm not like them and I wish I was, kind of thing. And it took me a very long time before I went, well, it's because you're you idiot. You are who you are, and you need to own that, if you like, and be that, and kind of be the best version of yourself that you can be. So, being yourself, you need to qualify that, but you need to find out who you are in order to be who you are, if that makes sense.
What's the key to a successful and fulfilling life? In your own words, what do you think it is?
I think part of the answer at least, is to figure out who you are. Um, like I said before, like you need to figure that out in order to be who you are. So you need to figure out who am I? What is my what's my reason for being? Even though that sounds a bit wanky, but no, what is my what makes me happy? What makes me feel fulfilled? To find that out and to work out that that can take a bit of time. That's not something you wake up when you're 18 and go, oh, yeah, I'll be this. At 18, I thought, if I could be a poet and take photos, that'd be pretty cool, which would be pretty cool. But that really wasn't a way to make any money back then. Or it may have been, but you had to be really good at it. And I was okay, but not great. But um, so figuring yourself out, finding someone to love and is also pretty important. I think have a partner in life, to have someone to be able to talk to be able to, um, to be able to share a life with, um, to be able to, um, and I don't want this to sound like it probably will sound, but I don't want to say compare yourself to, but if it's that old thing, if the wife's happy, everybody's happy kind of thing. That. So if she's not happy, then what am I doing wrong? What am I not doing right? It might be better than what am I doing wrong? What am I not doing right in order to change myself to make it right, so that we get together, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, my wife and I are quite, in some ways, quite different, but in other ways, quite. There's nobody else probably that I would fit with, and she would fit with. If like, she wouldn't marry my brother, for instance, and I wouldn't marry his wife, it because that wouldn't work. It only works because of who we are. So that kind of thing, I think it's quite good to have a. I say this because I've been brought up this way, I suppose, but to have some sort of spiritual connection and spiritual waypoint, for want of a better word, true north, if you like. Even though in the southern hemisphere there is no true north, it's Southern Cross, that kind of stuff. You find your pole star, whatever it is, that gives you something outside of yourself. And I think that whole idea, whether it's not just you, and it's not just you and your partner, but it's something bigger, a sense of community. And libraries are quite good at creating communities. So it's another way of, I guess, that kind of community building part of libraries kind of resonated. And it's also that whole thing about connection, and as well, that so you're connecting to people that you may not normally connect with, if that makes sense. But whether that's in the
Yep.
library, or whether that's in a church or a synagogue or a mosque or whatever, you need that kind of bigger thing, something bigger than yourself, or bigger than you and your partner, or bigger than you and your family. That kind of bigger thing to kind of, I guess, ground you. And also you've got other people to look at, and other people to tell you where you might be going wrong, if that helps. And so I think that kind of a deeper engagement with something bigger than yourself, that sort of connection to a community is also more important than I think many people put a. Everyone's on about. Well, lots of people are on about making the best you that you can possibly be. That kind of statement and that kind of thinking, be the you want to be, kind of thing. But I think part of that being the you that you want to be, or being the you that you should be, is also tied up with being part of a community, part of a partnership, um, part of a something bigger than yourself. Because otherwise, you end up being a bit of a narcissist, and that doesn't do anybody any good, really.
Thank you for sharing this. You said it's good to be yourself and not try to mirror or admire someone in particular to be like them, because everyone is unique in a way. Are there any final words of wisdom you would want to pass, apart from what you said previously, to the younger generation, or any piece of advice that you wish someone would have given you when you were younger?
I think it is about finding what is your passion. The best job to have is the job where you don't, it's not really a job, it's just somewhere you just like turning up to, kind of thing. So whether that's being an illustrator, or and drawing, or being a photographer, or whatever it is, working in libraries, it is about finding that thing that is a bit of a passion. And then turning up for work isn't really like turning up for work, it's because it's fun to do. It's a like I worked in an office, and it was ledgers back in the days of ledgers, and adding up and taking away and subtracting and all this sort of stuff. It drove me nuts. But I was only going to do it for a short period of time, and then I was going to do something else. And then I got moved to a different department, and that was fine. But that idea of finding something that you are passionate about and pursuing that, I think, is is really important. My nephew is an illustrator, which is why I used that, and he wanted to draw, and he wanted to illustrate, and that's what he ended up doing. And he managed to make it. He's managing to make a career out of that. And I look at him and go, "Damn, where was this when I was coming out of high school? Like, I would have loved to have done that. I don't know if I've been any good, but I would love to have tried. But that never seemed like if I had gone to my careers advisor at high school, he would have gone, "There's no money in that, mate. No money at all, mate. You better think of something else." Like that kind of thing would have been the of the day. And yet logo designers and all those kind of things have been around for donks, and people have always done it. And could I have done it? I don't know, but I would like to have a try. But the idea of pursuing something that is a passion, and I didn't kind of realize how big a part of my life libraries were until I started working there. And then I went, oh my God, why haven't I done this before? Like, and it was that kind of thing. That end of that first week was, what have I been doing? I could have been doing this 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Well, not 20 years ago, but 15 years ago. And that would have made much more sense than what I had been doing. But what I did in those 15 years before I started in the library also helped when I was in the library. So in the end, it didn't kind of matter. And I did look at my librarian boss and go, well, I don't want her job. So even if I'd started 15 years earlier, I might have ended up doing exactly what I did anyway. I don't know. But it's okay. I think, yeah. So getting back to your question, I think if you can find what your passion is, and that might take you a little while to figure that out, and that's okay. And if you end up doing 5 jobs, 6 jobs before you find what your passion is, that's okay. And you might have to do those jobs anyway in order to get the job that will be your passion. So you might, so that's, I would have loved to have a job. So the ABC, it's like the BBC in the UK. They had a library, very much current affairs, news, that kind of focus. I would have loved to have a job in that. It didn't happen. It never arose as an opportunity. And the one time it did, I didn't have my CV up to date, and I I don't know if I would have got it anyway, but that would have been, I thought, a lot of fun to do. Except it was up in Sydney, so it's an hour and a half to get there and an hour and a half home again, all that kind of stuff. I think you take what life's opportunities are thrown at you, but do do what is your passion, and you probably can't go too wrong in doing that. And just turn up because, like I said before, you don't know who you're going to sit next to, you don't know what the conversation will be, and you don't know where that might lead, and that might lead to a completely different career opportunity. And sometimes that good things happen.
Rob, thank you so much for sharing all these stories and wisdom. I truly appreciate it. It's been an
No
absolute
worries.
pleasure to be able to speak to you.
It's been good, Matt. It's been really good.